What's up, everybody? Let's talk today about casting Mind Blast as a Shadow Priest in Tier 9 and in Tier 10. I've seen a lot of people asking questions about this, saying, oh, well, we lost a Tier 8 4-piece bonus. Do we still want to cast Mind Blast? What do we do with it? I'm not sure. Let's talk about it. So, first of all, the Tier 8 4-piece was a nice bonus on top of Mind Blast, but it was not the reason that we casted it back in Ulduar. Mind Blast is just really strong for us right now. It's really good, and even in Tier 9, we're casting it 95% of the time. There's a really small circumstance when we're not going to be casting it, and I'll talk about that in a second. In Tier 10 is when the major shift is going to happen. We're still going to be casting Mind Blast, but it's not going to be on cooldown, and it's not going to be anywhere near as frequently as we're doing it now. Because not only it's not going to be on cooldown, we're going to be taking points out of Reduced Mind Blast, which is going to reduce the cooldown even further. Now, if you're not in the Shadow Priest Discord, Linello has created some awesome graphs that really highlight when we want to cast Mind Blast and when we don't want to cast it. And you can see that there's going to be a big shift when we get the Tier 10 4-piece bonus. That's really going to influence the strength of Mind Play. Now, if you watched my last video, it was all about how can we reduce our Mind Flay delay when we have successive casts, or really any cast that's coming after a Mind Flay, because you can't queue it. You have to press it immediately after your Mind Flay has finished. Now, that's going to be even more important in Tier 10, especially when we're casting so many more Mind Flays. So if you haven't watched that video, if you haven't downloaded that Weakaura, I would highly recommend it. Now, when it comes to Linello's chart, that's mainly taking into account the standard talent setup. I'm not sure how this might change if you're using the other talent setup that removes dispersion and puts some more points into the disc tree. We're still unsure if people are going to be really running this spec. It might be something that we save for towards the end of the phase when we have a lot of gear and we're not worried about dying and we don't really care about having dispersion or not. So that's something that might need to be looked at in the future. So now I'm going to switch to some charts that I created, essentially showing a timeline of a 2.5-minute fight. Now, the thing that you're not seeing is I have some numbers here, essentially dissecting the fight into 5-second chunks and looking at our spell power and haste by different sets of gear. Now, what I did to create this was essentially look at the log analyzer tool for one of my kills on Lord Jiraxis, and then I tried to replicate that for Tier 9 bis, Tier 10 non-bis, and Tier 10 bis, so that we could get an accurate representation of what our haste and spell power looks like throughout a fight. And what we have here is essentially a chart showing Tier 9 bis, Tier 10 non-bis, so this is essentially assuming you have your Tier 10 4-piece, and then maybe 1 or 2 items from the new raid. And then finally, we have Tier 10 bis below. Now, when we look at this chart, the shaded area is going to be when we're not casting Mind Blast, when it's better just to Mind Flay. Now you can see in Tier 9 bis, that happens very infrequently. So essentially in Tier 9 bis, for this to be worth it, to not cast Mind Blast, you need Lust, you need to be using your engineering gloves if you're an engineer, you need to have your trinket procs going if that's a flare, if that's a scale of fates. And if you're a troll, you're going to be using berserking during this time. And even if you're not a troll, you're still not going to be casting Mind Blast for a 5 to 10 second window at the beginning of Lust when you have all of your procs rolling. That's really it for Tier 9. Mind Flay is still not that strong relative to Mind Blast until we have a lot of buffs rolling during that Lust window. So other than that, you're going to be sticking to your standard rotation. Now, something I forgot to mention earlier is that I actually have an awesome Weakaura that will tell you when to not cast Mind Flay. Now, this is also going to exist in Tier 10, and once it does, I'll make a video talking about that Weakaura. But right now, it will calculate the math and calculate the stats of your character to tell you when and when not to cast Mind Blast, because it's extremely useful, and you're not going to be able to do this math all in your head on the fly. It's going to be really hard to try to figure out, and it's much easier when a Weakaura can tell you what to do than having to figure it out for yourself. So that's Tier 9. Let's talk about Tier 10 non-bis, when things really do get changed up a lot. Now, back to referencing Linello's graph, you can see that there is a large shift when you get that Tier 10 4-piece. That's because that's really going to increase the value of Mind Flay. And what this means is essentially for the first 40 seconds of the fight, we're not casting Mind Blast whatsoever. Lust is so strong that on its own pushes us up above that threshold where we don't want to cast Mind Blast anymore. And then after that, it's basically whenever we get a proc because of our trinkets, if we use engineering gloves and a potion, those are going to be things that also push us over the threshold. So after Lust, what this graph is reading here is around 60 seconds, we're getting We're getting engineering gloves back up. We are getting a proc from our tailoring cloak. And then at the 100 to 125 second mark, this is essentially 20 seconds of using Sindragosa's trinket, Phylactery of the Nameless Lich. And then the final area is another engineering gloves, tailoring proc, all of those things. So now, if you're not a tailor or engineer, your graph is going to look different. But I am using this as a BIS setup, or going from tier 9 BIS into ICC and trying to acquire BIS throughout ICC. So if you're not tailoring and engineering, again, your curve is going to look a little bit different, but this is just to highlight from a BIS perspective. Unfortunately, it would be too much effort to try to do this with all the different combinations of professions that exist in the game. And finally, let's talk about tier 10 BIS. Now, this is very similar to tier 10 non-BIS. You just have a little bit more static spell power and haste from your gear because you're now wearing all 277 items, and then you have a 284 weapon on top of that. So your gear is extremely strong. You're still going to be casting Mind Blast. That's the thing to note, is that at no point are we ever removing Mind Blast from our rotation. Here, it's not going to be as often, and you're not going to maintain full uptime with replenishment because, again, you're still not casting it during Lust. And then you have a few more periods throughout the rest of the fight where you're not going to be casting it. But that's just because really any single proc is going to put us over that threshold. We're going to be basically like, if this is a threshold to not cast Mind Blast, we're going to be sitting like right here with our standard gear once we hit ICC BIS. So at that point, really, you get a tailoring proc, you get your engineering gloves, you get a haste potion. Those are all things that are going to put you over that threshold. You know, maybe not the tailoring proc on its own, because that's only 295 spell power, but everything else is strong enough that a single buff otherwise is going to put you over that threshold to not cast Mind Blast. Now, as we get further along, through TOGC and closer to ICC, there will be more math done, and I'm sure better graphs than what I'm showing you here. But this is really just to illuminate how often we're going to be casting Mind Blast, and the thing is that it never truly drops out of our rotation. It's still going to be an important spell to cast, though we're not going to be casting it on cooldown like we are now. Anyway, that's all I have for you in this video. A huge shout out to my supporters on YouTube, because your support really does mean a lot to me, and I'd love to be able to grow this channel even bigger than it already is. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful, and please let me know if there's anything that you feel like I didn't cover, because I'm trying to do my best to provide you with as much up-to-date math as there currently is on ICC. Anyway, thanks again for watching. My name's Pantsface, and I'll see you in the next one.